thank you very much for joining us for this webinar today, our Belbin webinar series. We've got 2 a week. We've got another one tomorrow on remote teams and 2 more the week after. And we're really excited. This is a wonderful way to be able to talk and communicate with everybody in these peculiar times which we face ourselves, which we're all facing. What we're going to be doing for the next 45 minutes is be discussing what is it that a successful team needs. What is it that a team needs to be successful? We thought we'd sort of come back to this because we talk about teamwork a lot, but there's been a slight change, a slight shift now that we're all working from home as to what a team really does need. So we hope that over the next 45 minutes we'll have discussed this and you'll have some great things to take away to use yourselves, with your managers and with your teams and organisations. Now, rather than just my voice for the whole 45 minutes, and my name is Jo Keeler and I'm a managing partner here at Belbin, I thought I would invite Deborah Mcgovern, who is our head of training and consultancy at Belbin. And why did I invite Deborah? Well, she works with teams every day, worldwide. I don't think there's a continent you haven't done some work on in Deborah. And Deborah brings that voice of reason to things quite a lot. And say, well, actually, Jo, that might be the theory, but this is actually what happens. Deborah, would you say that's fair?
I was going to say, I love that, and I wonder if you could put that bit in writing, please, the voice of reason. I really like, but yes, what I'm doing is certainly not every day, but working with teams, and that can be board of directors, it can be a really junior team of people coming into onto a new MBA course or whatever. So it's right across the board, and what I hope is that in sharing things, there'll be some sort of practical things that I've come across over the years as well, and also very much recent things with, as Jo said, we're all working remotely, and there are some similarities, but there's also some significant differences, and I think we want to sort of pick up on those as we go along, so be referring to teams and what's happening now with remote teams.
No, that's fabulous. Thank you, Deborah. Now, because Deborah and I will hopefully be getting into a real good chat and discussion about all things teams, we can't also handle Q&As at the same time. That's just taking our technical abilities stretched too far. So what we are going to ask, if you do have any questions, just type them in the Q&A section and we will get back to you after we've finished. It's just if we try and have a 60-way conversation, it's going to be a little bit difficult, so apologies, but if we could do that, that would be marvellous.
We might have time for some at the end of this session. Yes,
oh no, absolutely, yes,
so we'll do that.
Oh, but it depends how much we talk, because one thing that we do have to just do a little bit of a hi. My top team roles are resource investigator, shaper and coordinator. Now this means that I am over talkative, I will talk a lot, and I'll also want to be in charge where that shaper comes out, but I'm going to try and play more my coordinator hat today. Just look at the broader view, not that I can see much actually because my fringe is in the way, take the broader view and let Deborah have a word in edgeways.
Thank you, Jo. But we're not really the ideal combination, because in fact my top roles are coordinator and resource investigator, but with shaper too. I have less of the shaper than Jo, so I can tame that and hold that back. But we've worked together now for 18 years.
Oh my goodness.
For those marriages last, I think, and we just interrupt one another, and so I think actually you'll probably get that as we go along. We'll just converse as we would if we were sitting together, more or less.
More or less, more or less. Slightly more polite, I'd like to think, Deborah. Right, okay, so let's make a start. What do successful teams need? Now, the first thing on most lists, and I've gone back to a flip chart because I'm fed up with PowerPoint. I'm also homeschooling my 3 children at the moment, and that's PowerPoint-tastic at home. So I'm going back to the old flip chart. So what is it that a team needs? What is the first thing that a successful team needs? And this is purpose. It needs to understand what it's there to achieve. Very often we have phone calls into the office and saying, I want to run a team session, I want you to help me with the team. And one of the questions we ask is, what is the team set up to do? And that isn't always an easy answer for people. That's something that isn't always strictly obvious, but it's so critical that the team knows what it is there to achieve. What is its purpose? Deborah, you've had...
Yeah, no, I was going to just going to cut in at that point, but I think you might say, well, of course that's obvious, of course the team needs a purpose, and I think that quite often if we're talking to, let's say, the leader of the team, the manager, the director, whomever, and they'll say, yes, of course we've got the purpose, and we then ask, well, do people understand that? Yes, of course, yes. We ask people, you know, do you agree with the purpose? And the answer is yes. But quite often there's that difference in understanding. So my little suggestion is that if I am running a team session, one of the very first things that I like to do, almost as an exercise really for the team, is get people individually to write down what they think is the purpose of the team. And then we look at that and we get people to share and see whether there is genuinely a common purpose, because a number of times you find it's sort of in the same direction but rather different, and you really can't start anything unless you know just what it is, because you can't measure. You know, if you haven't got an absolute purpose, you don't know what the goals are, you don't know how you're going to take things further from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a key thing, isn't it? Very often we say, do you understand? And everybody says, yes. And we say, right, and we crack on. And it's getting that time right at the very beginning, isn't it? To ensure we have that clarity of understanding what the purpose, the objective of the team is. I think this is really important. The other thing, I was over in America last year, and there was a meeting I had with this incredible HR director. He was just amazing. And he was saying that he always tries to link the objective, the purpose of the team in with the overall strategy of the organisation, because it just gives it that extra, but why, doesn't it? I think that's really useful to do. Is it's not just a team by itself, it's part of a bigger picture, it's part of the overall strategy of the organisation. So is this understood? Is the purpose understood? Also timescales, Deborah?
Just about, yeah, I was just going to jump in there and say, I think that if you've got from the purpose, usually come the objectives, and part of that is also, it's like, what are the objectives? But then what is it? So what are we trying to achieve? And when are we trying to achieve it by? And why are we trying to achieve it, of course, which comes back into the purpose. So it's all of those questions, all of those things to think about. And so often the team wants to kind of get in, really, when that bit is not fully agreed. So even if that takes you ages to do, you know, well, ages, but I mean, even if it takes a bigger chunk of time than you were anticipating, it is worth it, because if you haven't got that, and when we have people saying, well, we want a session because we want the team to work better together. Yes, why do you want them to work better together? Well, you know, it's all got to come back to that, rather than, yep, we're doing a team building, we're going to see how people relate to one another. Great, that's incredibly important. We'll be going on to some of those things, but I keep repeating myself, but unless we know what it is that we're aiming for and why, it's a waste of everyone's time and money.
So absolutely, so it's linking it back into those organisational needs, it's looking into the business needs, the bottom line of the business. What is that we're trying to achieve? When does it need to be achieved by? And I suppose linked in with that, Deborah, is that we have the whole idea of structure and clarity within teams, don't we? I'm just going to put that as a separate one, actually, just at the bottom here.
Okay, yeah, that's yes, yeah. Because with the structure and clarity, I mean, if you haven't got something which is set out so that people know what their role is, I don't mean just team role, but their actual job, their position within that, what their individual purpose is within that structure. If that's not clear, then how have you got anything to measure, and how can you know if people are actually in the right position, in the right place to help to achieve that? So I would say, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the more time you can spend up front when you're starting with a project or whatever with a team is so crucial. I also think if we have that ownership and we know what contribution we're making, we know the structure, and we have that clarity, is that when things do go a little bit wrong down the line, or when it gets into a bit of a grey, murky area, we have a more of an understanding of how and who is going to be required to help us through those situations as well. It sort of takes away a lot of the unknowns, doesn't it?
Well, Jo, the other thing I was thinking on here, we're talking about teams and a purpose, but in fact, it depends. As we all know, teams can be different. Some are really static and some are moving. You know, sometimes what we're wanting is to have a throughput of people, or it's project teams. So I think some of these things we're talking about, perhaps we'll elaborate on a bit later in relation to what type of team you're thinking about.
Do you know, that's so important, isn't it? Because sometimes we think of teams as this static entity. I think let's discuss it now, Deborah. Yeah. Let's just discuss it now. Let's go for it. And we think, right, there's this team and it's going to be the same for the next 18 months until we've hit our objectives. But actually, that's not reality, is it? The objective is, it's like the play, isn't it? And we need to know which people are going to be brought in depending on which act of the play we're in at the moment. And so teams do need to be agile. Different people need to come in and out of these teams, but it depends on where that team is. And we need to have that agility, that flexibility and that understanding, I suppose, to be able to do that.
Well, we do all of those things, absolutely, but being realistic about it, certainly I know that a number of the teams I work with, that's not the case. You know, it's a team which has been together for some time, it stays together, and that can be really great, but somehow what you have to get within that is some air and some movement and getting people to think differently. Now, you'd expect me to say this, but I think sometimes that's where a team building session can come in, and then team coaching in the longer term, ideally. But certainly getting people to not just think, okay, you know, like Jo and I have worked together for so long and we know one another. But if you're not careful, there can be it can become stolid. It can mean that there is not any new thinking. Think about the not just teams, but organizations. So teams, departments, organizations, usually big jumps forward and improvements and changes actually happen because sometimes someone new comes in or thinks differently, or there is a way of people having to think differently. And usually that means some people are going to feel uncomfortable in the process because it's not what I know. It's not where I usually am. I know this structure. There's a clarity to this structure. And then things move around. And we know that can be uncomfortable, particularly depending on the team role. You know, for some people, like for instance, say implementers are the people who do like some clarity and do like structure. So for them, that's going to be very uncomfortable if it changes. You've then got people perhaps like, say, plants or resource investigators, where it's more transformation is what they want. And so where there isn't enough change and movement, they actually become bored. So they're sort of can be almost dialing in the performance, to pick up on your analogy with a play, Jo.
And right now, my goodness, this is, you know, a lot of us are working in completely different teams in a completely different way, aren't we? I mean, we're having right now, it's that external influence is making us change the way that we work, because we're not all in the office, and to be able to be flexible, adaptable, and everything around there is it's the only way that we're going to keep going, isn't it? I mean, this is really a test of that agility of a team, I'd say.
Vitally, vitally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also about making sure that in the first place, you have the right people in the team. I mean, again, some of these things sound so obvious, but it's making sure that you've chosen the right people to come into the team. So
You know, I'm going to put that down on the flip chart because I think that's really important.
All right, if we have it as a separate item.
Yeah, I'm going to have that as separate. So I think so people are chosen for what they can contribute. It's all about diversity, really, this piece, isn't it? I think it's about, sometimes we find that people, people certain job titles, or because it's seen that they have to be part of a team, isn't it? Or an ego is there, so therefore they have to be included. When in fact what we're looking for, and what, you know, a lot of Meredith's research also showed, that the most successful teams have that diversity, not just behaviourally, not just that lovely contribution, all 19 roles in there, but also that we have the functional roles as well. We have diversity of function as well as behaviour for those teams to be incredibly successful, and that's why people are chosen, not for any other reason.
Well, that should be.
I love this, Deborah. You just like bang, but actually, I think you'll find.
No, but I mean, I'm sure. I can't see everyone's faces, but I'm sure that for so many of us, when we're working with teams, actually, of course, should have diversity, but so often there isn't. And what happens is that people, especially where it's been a very democratic approach, you know, the team leader, we run it so that everyone has a say, we work well together. And when there's someone new that needs to come in, there's a vacancy, bring someone new in, we all meet them, we've had a discussion with them, they're going to fit. Yes, they're going to fit because they're one of us. So we've got almost replication, if we're not careful, cloning. And I'm sure, you know, those of us who look at then, say, a team role circle and plotting out the number of times that we find clusters and gaps, because in some ways it can be easier to say, oh, that sort of person works well, we need more of that, instead of the person who's maybe going to be uncomfortable or doesn't seem to fit, or we don't enjoy going to the bar with as much in the evening, you know. But sorry, I just feel quite strongly about that.
No, and so you should, and I think that's true, isn't it? Actually, the reality of the situation isn't always true to the theory, so to speak.
Yes.
But it's just being, I think a lot of this time this may be the case, but it's being aware of it, isn't it? It's being conscious that this is what's going on. Look, we're all quite similar here.
Yes.
Those
and
sorts of words.
Sorry, but knowing that similarity means that without the diversity of opinion, approach, behaviour, the team is actually limiting its opportunities to be really effective. And to, you know, if I just liken it to, for instance, to salespeople, for example, if you have got two people who are quite similar going out, but you know, are looking to sell, and they're having this discussion with a major client, but they're so similar that from the client's perspective, if they're talking to people, let's say they don't connect with the particular team roles, then you've limited your chances by not having a broader spread of different types, of different behaviours, of different knowledge, even if it comes to it. And I'm saying that, Jo, and I'm realising we're not really practising what we're preaching here.
No, we're not, are we? But never mind, that's fine. It's a different part. We're not a team, Deborah. We're a twosome. And I think it is. Yes, I'm a team of two. Somebody's actually just written, isn't it, human nature to clump people together and to pick people that will fit with us. And I think it is, isn't it? It is perfect. That is the natural thing that we do. And I think a lot of team building, if I can quote, Lencioni from 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, he said, teamwork is so powerful, but it is also so incredibly rare. And the reason it's rare, and there's lots of studies that show how difficult teamwork is because we have to do things that aren't second nature. We are stepping out of our comfort zones. And for teams to be truly effective, we have to make conscious decisions about the people who are in it, conscious decisions about the way we're going to interact. And that's how we're going to get to high performing. So we need to really work at teamwork. It's nothing natural sometimes about it. We have to constantly pick up and we have to work at it.
Exactly. So we don't get that groupthink.
Yeah, absolutely.
Flashed up on our screen. Yes.
Yes, we don't want that. Yeah, and you do find within certain organisations certain culture of organisation will be attracted to certain types of team roles, so it is more likely to happen. But it doesn't mean it should just happen. One needs to be conscious to try and make a break from that. So really, I mean, that's another thing a team desperately needs, because you've got people chosen for their contribution, is we're also looking for that dynamic interaction, aren't we?
For sure.
And we're making sure, yeah.
Which you'll get more of when you have, well, it's really, I suppose, repeating, but not to have the homogeneity, if you like, and also by knowing that it is not, and this becomes really key. I think sometimes when people have used team roles, but then almost misusing them, because people, if we're not careful, become labelled, which, as we know, is not the right thing to do at all. But that actually means that, oh, we've got this thing to do, so and so always does it. Now, sometimes, you know, it's in their job title and it's their experience, but behaviourally as well. Certain people do certain things. In meetings, we know that some people are more likely to speak out and speak up. And it's not that there's actually the movement with the interaction between people. That, again, it's about getting a bit stuck. It's about not recognising that how important it is that different people are going to react differently and need to play a part in a different way, really.
I think that's really interesting, especially now, actually, Deborah. I think I'd say that whilst we're meeting online and we're Zoom-tastic when we're with people within a team, that dynamic interaction, we need to work a little bit harder at it, don't we? Because we're slightly different, we're coming across in a different way on our cameras, on our webcams, than we would be if we were all sitting quite close to each other in a room. So we need to make sure that that dynamic interaction isn't just assumed because we're no longer in the same space, but we work at it and we check to see which people really aren't contributing and bring them in. We make sure that people feel that they can contribute.
Well, it's also much easier for people. I mean, I was reading some quite interesting work, sort of some recent papers, but also from the past, but where you have people who are communicating virtually, or virtual teams who are communicating remotely, it's much, much easier to have disengagement, even if someone can seem to be there. So in a meeting, I mean, even in our meetings, sometimes, you know, fine, one's there, you're there in body, but you know, you don't actually know that I'm glancing across at another screen, or, you know, my legs jumping around under the table. And I mean, I know that in meetings that can happen anyway, but you can pick up on those cues much more easily. So it's felt that because of that, there has to be a greater awareness, particularly of the person, say, running that meeting, that they are actively trying to engage people in those discussions, and that it's not too samey as well, that you know that you're looking to play to the fact that some people need to have much more interaction. So, for instance, some of you here in this webinar, you know, might be thinking, yeah, fine, and I'm watching this and I'm doing something else at the same time, because you're not having a positive, an active, I should say, positive, active contribution. But you know, if we could actually see people as well, we can't tap in as easily. So it's just to say, think really carefully about how to get people to be involved in a way that suits them. So not to run each meeting in exactly the same way. That's one of the recommendations anyway.
Oh no, and I think we'll probably touch on that again a little bit later on, because I think that's quite important, isn't it? What do we have to do to change slightly, because we're now having teams online? I'm going to put that up there somewhere. Look, it started I'll turn it over in a minute, but I think I'll just put that sort of dynamic interaction. And don't worry, all of this is being recorded, so everybody can look at this, you know, in more detail afterwards. I'll send it out. Dynamic interaction. You've got that. Yeah, I like that, to make sure that it's alive, make sure that everybody's contributing. Now I'm going to turn this over now. I really should go on a course of how to actually write on a flip chart well.
Oh, one of our colleagues has, and it's fabulous.
I know.
She does these works of art on the flip chart. I'd love to do that.
No, me too. I'll schedule it in for next time I'm free. Right, I'm going to put up here, Deborah, just shared leadership. Now, one of my favourite books about teams is by Katzenbach and Smith, and it's called The Power of Teams. And they say, as does Meredith in his management teams and also team roles at work, and I'm sure it's replicated by other people as well, is they say if a team is truly high performing, if it is truly there where everybody is making their contribution, where they know the objectives, what's expected, when it's expected, and they know how to use one another, actually a really high performing team does not need a leader. They all are leading the team, and they all lead as and when it's appropriate for them to do so. But there isn't somebody just saying, do this, do that, delegate the work here, delegate the work there. But a true high-performing team, I'm saying this quickly now because I'm looking at your face, Deborah, is that you can share the leadership.
It's a lovely idea. No, I mean, of course, it's great, but I just don't think it happens very often. And I think that what we can perhaps help leaders to do is to see that it's really important not to have the I'm in charge badge on them, and that what we're wanting is to have people, leaders, saying, okay, you know, for this part of this project or whatever, but I would like you to be, it's about the delegation really, I'd like you to be taking responsibility for this, or I'd like you to, you know, so it's just making sure that that leaders are using other people properly, and using, I mean, in the sense of allowing those people to thrive. And I think those saying to someone, it should be sort of shared responsibility, shared leadership, is great. I think that takes a lot of our working with people to get them to feeling safe enough really to do that, and to thinking, you know, not be thinking, well, I need to show that I've got to this point. That's all. I'm going to stop there because
I think
it's a longer session than we've got here.
Yeah, absolutely. But perhaps what we're trying to say is, for a really high performing team, for a team to be really successful, is, you're right, it's not having that one person going, I am the leader. It's somebody who is able to take a more consultative approach, somebody who is able to bring in the talents of everybody as and when is needed. And in fact, he doesn't really want to wear a badge saying leader.
Yeah.
In fact, is quite happy taking a backseat to ensure that everybody else is contributing as and when they can, and perhaps to have that shared leadership is the ideal.
Yes.
This is where we want to get to.
Yeah.
But a team, I would say, is never going to be particularly high performing if it's always reliant on one member to say, this is what we're doing.
Well, no, also, I mean, not just in that way, but in a really practical way, you know, then if that person's not there, other people haven't felt empowered enough to be able to take things on. So I think that's it. It's about making sure that that person has, I'm going to use the word again, empowered other people in their team.
Okay, the word empower here.
To achieve.
I've said it several times, I felt that I needed to.
Yeah, why not?
Perfect. Now I'm going to go all a bit techie now, because I'd like to launch this here. Because the next thing we're going to have here is the word size. And this is something that is often overlooked. Very few people talk about size, very few people. Katzenbach and Smith obviously do, because I really do recommend anybody go and read that, actually, The Wisdom of Teams. I know it's Chris Jackson's one of his favourite. I know he's listening in today as well. And size is absolutely crucial for teams to be successful. So here we go. I'm going to launch this. It should now be on your screen. What do you think is the ideal team size? And I want you just to click. You can scroll down. It goes all the way to 10 plus. So if you would just like to say now what you think your ideal team size is, in your opinion, that would be fabulous. Then I'm going to share it with everybody. Okay, so it's about half of you have voted now. That's not bad. The other half are doing their emails. I jest. I do apologise. I jest. Okay. You can stop doing your emails as well, Deborah. Right. Fantastic. End polling now. I'm going to share these results. That's really interesting. So we have 37%, say 5. We have then 6 is 33%, 7%, 11% there. 7% say 4. Nobody's going 1, 2, or 3. Okay. So that's really interesting, because actually what we have found and what the researchers found is that teams need to be small. You really don't want to be going into double figures. Somebody said 10 plus there, because everybody needs to be able to make that contribution. Everybody's voices need to be heard. And I always think it's quite similar to when you're at a dinner party, which I used to be, I to dinner parties years ago, I haven't been to one for years, is that when you try and have a conversation at a dinner party, you can do it easily with a 4, 5, 6 people. Any more than that, it is really hard to keep everybody on the same conversation. And so Meredith actually says that his preferred team size is 4. And in fact, a lot of the work at Henley with Teamopoly, the team size was just 4. So it tends to be a lot smaller than actually what people think. But Deborah, you've got some.
Well, I was going to say, yes, I was wanting to really share that whilst I know Meredith's absolute ideal is 4, and if you can't have 4, have 6, because he believes that if you have even numbers, there has to be genuine consensus to agree something. Okay. Mm-hmm. However, it was interesting, but it was a number of years ago now. But I remember that Glasgow University had were funded by a consultancy to do some research on this, and they came up with 5 as the optimum number for exactly the opposite reasons, really, that you would never be stuck because someone could have a casting vote. So I think there's not an absolute on this. Certainly, if I'm just thinking about running some courses, so that's been both our accreditation courses and then some team sessions, and doing these remotely through Zoom, then I found that having quite small numbers, maybe up to 6 people, is quite useful. I have, though, reverted to trying to not just to stick to what Meredith said, but I found 4 really good. Now, if it's a genuine team, you have to go with whatever number, but where it's 4, it means that over a period of time, we can have the breakout rooms with people working in 2s, and you can have combinations of, so 3 different sessions of working in breakout rooms. If you've got 4 people, you've covered them all within 3 different sessions, and that seems to be rather useful. But anyway, as Jo said, it's number of people you'd really like to have at a good dinner party where they can.
I like that. Good. Yes. Perfect. I actually think, and I think this is perhaps more a reflection of myself, is that consensus is great, but also if you've got timelines. I know everybody needs to agree, and you don't want anybody taking the deciding vote, but actually you can debate things forever and a day, and sometimes a decision does need to be made. So one could also have that argument perhaps to have an odd number as opposed to an even, but I think it is better to have that. But I think the key element here is the size. Now, I'm finding this quite interesting at the moment, because in our head office we have a team of 10, which obviously is a group, it's not a team, because we're all working on different things at the moment. But with the current situation, we're now down to a team of 4, or a group of 4. And my goodness, nobody can hide anymore, not that anybody did anyway, we've got an amazing team at Belbin, but everybody's contribution is heard so much more. And it's very interesting how the impact of each individual is greater now that there are only 4 of us. And one thing I would say, because I've heard some of this on the grapevine, is that now a lot of us are working from home, it's easy just to bring somebody else in, because you're not physically having to get them in. So why don't they just join the team on Zoom? They're just another face in a box. And it's better, isn't it, if we've got everybody else involved? Well, no, it's really not. And now we're working virtually, it's even more important to keep that size as small and as manageable as possible. Wouldn't you say, Deborah?
Yeah, no, completely. As long for people to have the genuine contribution. I think there's another thing you've touched on, Jo, but I'm not sure that we'll go off into that at the moment. But it is looking at the additional pressure that can come from people working remotely at the moment, when, you know, within some organisations people have been furloughed. So we know that some people are really doing almost the jobs of two people and trying to do that, and it's harder to have demarcation lines when you're at home. So I really like the way, in fact, that we within Belbin have had some clearer, it works better for some people's jobs than others, but some clearer demarcations where people are allowed to say, okay, I'm going off for an hour and a half to be with the children. We've got some people who have young children and I need to do that. But I would just flag that up as something which, in the main, I mean, research previously had shown that being able to work from home usually for most people was less stressful and they were more productive. So I think the productivity can still be there, but it's at the moment for other reasons, perhaps the stress coming in as well. So,
yeah. No, I think that's great. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, actually. If you haven't already signed up for our webinars, we're going to be talking about remote teams and how best to manage them, and how we make those teams as high performing as possible. So I'm just going to do a bit of a recap here. What does a successful team need? It needs a purpose, it needs an objective. These things need to, there needs to be timings on there, and people need structure and clarity. They need to know how the team is, who's involved, because those teams also need diversity. They need to have diversity. People need to be brought in for what they can contribute, and it needs to be a whole range of skills and behaviours. We need to have that interaction. It needs to be very dynamic. We need to have quite agile teams, and ideally we need to have shared leadership. And I think as long as we have those values, those really strong values underlying everything, it is more achievable. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's something that we do need to work on. Size, we need to keep our teams small. And the more complex a problem is, don't increase the team size, increase the number of teams that are working concurrently. So if you've got something that is really important, you've got something that is going to require more than 4 or 5 minds because you need more in there, don't just increase the team size, have concurrent teams working on the same problem, and then everybody share their findings. Now, the next thing that a real successful team needs, and this was brought up with Google doing a lot of work, they called it the Project Aristotle, that they wanted to find out why some of their teams worked really well and why some didn't. It seems to be a common thread, and we want to find out more about these teams. And what they found, their key finding here, was the most successful teams had what they termed as psychological safety. And we've touched on this, Deborah, I think throughout the last half hour, actually. We've touched on bits of this, but I think it's really important to say explicitly the role of psychological safety. And I want to use the word trust here, actually.
Yes, completely.
It's easier to spell. So I'm just going to put that down here. Trust. My goodness, we need this at the moment, don't we? This is critical right now, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think it's actually, I'm glad you put trust in a way. I mean, psychological safety is so vital, but I think it's become one of those things that's bandied about, one of those expressions that's bandied about. You know, when you used to have, there were certain words, one of the words I used, empowerment, but you know, one can almost do a bingo when you go, you're talking to a client and you just mark down how long does it take before they get to saying that. And I do think that with consultants at the moment that we're tending to perhaps overuse this. But having said that, there's nothing really funny about it. It's absolutely vital to have that people feeling that they can allow themselves to be vulnerable, they can speak out, and they can they can say what they think and what suggestions they might have, and know that they will not be blamed or judged. Now, again, is that realistic? Of course, we can't help judging people when we hear certain things at certain times, but actually knowing that something can be said and they will not be jumped upon straight away, that will be considered and taken into account, that they can yes, open up really, and that they're not going to be interrupted. That's another thing. It's in a meeting that people are not interrupting one another, that conflict can be there but be incredibly positive. So it's not about no, we're keeping all the conflict absolutely down. No, if it's there, let's bring it up. Now, that's very much, I know we'll talk about this probably more tomorrow, because it's the leader's role in this, but it's so important to allow that and to work out, have agreement about how you're going to deal with disagreement.
Yeah.
But I know I said, oh, sorry, so you have a word in edgeways in a minute, Jo, but I know I said earlier about where teams are too static, there's not movement, but also where there is no degree of conflict, or perhaps we should say positive disagreement, then actually you don't get the new ideas, you don't get the moving forwards. And often you don't, going right back to what you're trying to achieve. You may achieve the purpose in, okay, it's step 1, step 2, step 3, but you can't go beyond that.
No.
So.
No, this is wonderful. Deborah, I love working with you. It's just brilliant. Actually, when Deborah chairs meetings, and I know that not just with teams, she has this squidgy ball thing that you're only allowed to talk actually if you've got that. And I think that's one way, isn't it, of really encouraging it. We wrote an article quite a while ago now about psychological safety. I'm just going to go through the headings so that we've got all of that in there, because I think it's such a big subject. And really, one key thing is to treat others how they would like to be treated. It's not how you want to be treated. It is understanding that difference and adapting yourself to be able to let everybody make the most out of their contribution, just to be able to feel that they can be heard. Encourage mistakes, make it safe enough for people to encourage them, but allow people to keep accountability. There's nothing worse than people say, I'm allowed to make lots of mistakes. Well, yes, you are, but let's be accountable for those. So what's going to change? What are we going to do differently? You can make them, but let's learn from that mistake, I think, is the key thing. This is why I'm looking at my bit of paper. You just said encourage conflict. And it's Richard Hackman's study actually showed that disagreements were good for a team as long as they are handled in the right way. And I think that's the key thing, is it's the way it's being handled. We need to allow creativity to flourish, and we need to promote honest, constructive feedback. And also, as a leader with that psychological safety, they need to balance the needs for guidance and autonomy. I quite like that. How much do you tell people what they're going to do? How much do you let them get on with it? How much do you micromanage? Again, that all leads into this psychological safety issue as well. Do you know, Deborah, I think we just need a separate webinar about psychological safety, because I think that's such a big subject, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe. I just did want to pick up on something that you were saying there, Jo, about, you mentioned about autonomy, and I was thinking how, in fact, in virtual teams, usually, because if you're remote, there is, in fact, a greater degree of autonomy. Or at least perceived to be, but it's then, you need alongside that a strong amount of accountability, and to make sure, because it's less easy. You can't see, for example, what other people in Belbin are doing all the time at the moment, and that's good. You don't want to micromanage, as you say, but it's just about getting that balance, especially in virtual teams, and to make sure people know what the deliverables are. Absolutely,
at every time. Now, our deliverable was a webinar within 45 minutes, and we've got a minute now to be able to come down. I know this is always going to happen. But I think what we've done is actually we've covered the main key elements. of what a successful team needs. And of course, there's so much more that's involved here. There's so much more that we can do. This is why, hang on, oh, yeah, this is why we have an organisation that actually just looks at teams and individuals, isn't it? But one of the last things I am just going to say here is, do you know what makes everything a damn sight easier? And that is having a shared team language.
Oh, I know one. I know.
Do you? Do you? Do you? I can't even spell it.
Belbin Team Roles. No,
Belbin Team Roles. Brilliant. It's got to cut. Everything comes back to Belbin at the end. And it is. It's just a shortcut, isn't it? It's like Deborah and I right at the very beginning here. Brilliant. My top team roles are resource investigator, shaper, coordinator. This means that. And Deborah and everybody who understands the language today knew exactly what the situation was going to be. Or it could be the fact that, you know, we're both playing our shaper roles a bit too much, Deborah. There may be some potential conflict. What are we going to do about that? So the use of a shared language that everybody understands, my goodness, it makes everything. It doesn't make it, you know, click and suddenly everything's fine. No, it just makes it that little bit easier.
But it's communication.
Oh.
I mean, everything comes down to communication. I mean, that sounds so trite, but actually it's so absolutely true at so many levels. And if there's a way of aiding that communication, I think, of course, that helps. And that's what we work with clients on, of having that language as being a part of it anyway. It's not the whole.
Isn't it? But it also helps, somebody just quickly said that, and I'm going to say this, Trevor, because I think that's really useful, is that it also means that some people can say, hang on, my main contributions aren't needed right at the moment, but actually some of my more manageable roles are, some of those other roles that perhaps I could develop, and we need to help, and that's part of that psychological safety, we need to help people to be able to develop other roles so that they can play them as and when the team and the organisation needs you to do so.
Yes.
And again, understanding that language makes that a bit easier, doesn't it?
For sure.
Fabulous.
Sorry, well, I'm just going to give you time for questions, though.
Well, no, but do you know what we're going to do is we're going to continue recording. So we've got one question in, and so when everybody gets this recording at the end, tomorrow, because I need to do a little bit of complete finisher on it.
Whoa.
I know, my technical skills at the moment are amazing. When they get it tomorrow, they'll be able to have the answers there. So if everybody wants to go, that's wonderful, lovely to see you. If you want to stay around just for 2 minutes, then we'll just continue for a little bit longer. But just to recap, purpose, objectives, is this understood? Teams need this. They need to know structure, clarity. People need to be chosen for their contribution. There needs to be dynamic interaction. There needs to be diversity. Oh, there needs to be shared leadership. It needs to be small, the size needs to be looked at. We need to have trust, psychological safety, and there needs to be a shared team language because communication is key. Oh, do you know what? I've loved using the flip chart. I haven't used them for so long. I think this is fabulous. What we will do is we'll be in touch. You know, we'd love to talk to you more about how we can help your teams become more successful, higher performing. I'm just going to look at the question that we have here. Oh, this is easy. This is an easy one. Who wrote The Power of Teams? Okay, it's somebody called Katzenbach and Smith. I'm going to write that down here. I'll send you the link to it. Katzenbach and Smith, The Power of Teams. It is a wonderful, wonderful read. So thank you for that, Elaine. And don't worry, I'll put a link to that somewhere in the email. Go on, Deborah, you want to say something?
Well, no, but I don't know if this is going to work or not, because I don't know how many people we've got left here at the moment.
32.
Okay, I would just really like to know whether people found it useful to have things on, not useful, but good to have it on the flip chart rather than, you know, so we're trying to get away from just using slides all the time and everything being on screen. But I'd just be interested to know what
raise
people
hands. So raise hands if you prefer a flip chart. Thanks, Jill. Okay, actually, it's about half and half.
Right. Okay.
It's about half and half. That's really interesting. Thank you. Good thinking, Deborah. I haven't even thought of that. So, from Deborah Mcgovern and myself, Jo Keeler, thank you very much for joining us, and join us for some more tomorrow if you can make it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.